Alright, hi you guys, welcome. Today we'll be talking about samples and surveys. Okay, so we'll be talking about first an item I talked about last time, which was population and a sample. Okay, so those actually have two distinct meanings of their own. Okay, so a population is all the members of a set. Okay, could be your class, could be I don't know, your town, your city, your state, whatever you deem to be the population. It could be all the dogs in the house. It could be all the dogs in you and your 5 friends' houses. Okay. Now, a sample is a subset. It's a subset or part of a population. Okay. All right. So, in other words, if you're looking at a subset, in other words, if you were to consider the whole school and you just wanted a subset, like for example, you wanted all the senior boys, that would be a subset of seniors. Or your school, if you wanted all the science students, you would just ask all the students who have taken science or are taking science. Well, that technically would be everyone. So all the students who are currently taking science. So that would be a sample right there. Now, the reason why there's a difference between the two is all the members of a set, the population is harder to do experiments with or take surveys or to do just anything with. So it costs money, it costs time. So most of the time, a lot of people like to use samples. And if you remember with standard deviations, samples for standard deviations, you did n minus 1, and for population, you just divided by n. So at the very end, when you're working with variance and standard deviation. So it's very important that you define if you're working with a sample or a population first off. Okay. Alright, now, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to actually do some sampling types. So if you wanted to actually grab a sample from either a population or from a sample. So that's what we're going to be talking about next. Okay, so what we'll be talking about next are these types of samples: a self-selected, a systematic, and a convenience sample. Okay, so we'll be talking about that one. So for a convenience sample, we are going to select any member of the population who are let me make sure I'm spelling conveniently right. I like it. The one time I'm looking to spell a word is one of the hardest words. And readily available. Okay, so it's when you select any member of the population who are conveniently and readily available. Okay, could be a person that has a telephone and you call a whole bunch of people on the telephone. Could be a person that's just walking by the store. That's a convenience sample. Okay, for a self-selected sample, okay, we are going to select only members of the population who volunteer for the sample. Okay, so that's like, for example, hey, we're looking for people to take part in a study. Who would like to do it? And only the people that show up. That would be a self-selected sample. Okay, now a systematic sample is order the population in some way. Could be a random way, could be your own way, doesn't matter. Well, random way is probably better. And then select at regular intervals. Okay, so that's a systematic sample. So in other words, list from youngest to oldest, and then pick a random number, and then start selecting at regular intervals. Okay, so you can actually get a little bit more randomized type of sample. Okay, now there is one that was right here, random sample. A random sample is all members of the population are equally and likely to be chosen. Okay. I'm not going to lie, there's one of these samples that is the best above all, and that's going to be a random sample. It reduces the most amount of bias and all kinds of bad stuff that conveniently screw around with statistics. Okay, you just now heard me talk about bias. Now, bias is a systematic error introduced in the sampling method. Okay, let's change that color to green. That's a lot better. So it's a systematic error introduced in the sampling method. So for example, a convenient sample is select any member of the population who are conveniently and readily available. What about people out of town? We can't choose them, so we're just picking people that stayed home. So if we were asking a question about traveling, we're really messing up our answer if we ask only people that stay home. Okay, self-selected survey is actually one of the worst. Self-selected sample, because the people are volunteering, you already know that their questions or their statements, they're going to be pro or against whatever you're going to be saying. So they're not going to have a really unbiased opinion on it. Okay. All right, systematic sample is nice. You are kind of ordering them and stuff, and there's this one thing called the Simpson's paradox that you might run into, but it's a lot better than just the self-selected sample or the convenient sample. Okay. Now the random sample is all members of the population are equally likely to be chosen is one of the best, because you're randomly choosing them, you're removing the bias of them being there, the convenience bias, the self-selected bias. It's an amazing setup to where you can actually sit there and go, oh, okay, I really did choose this person at random, so I'm really going to get an answer I'm not expecting whatsoever, especially when you're doing a survey. Okay, all right. Okay, now one way to collect sample information is to perform a study rather than just asking questions. So what we would do is an actual study. Okay, so the first one is going to be an observational study. Now, an observational study is you measure or observe members of a sample in such a way that they are not affected by the study. Okay, so in other words, you just observe. That's the key thing. You pick out a set and then you just observe and don't interfere. Okay, simple as that. Do not interfere, but just observe. See what's happening. In a controlled experiment, you divide the sample into two groups. You impose a treatment on one group but not on the other control group. Then you compare the effects of the treated group to the control group. Okay? So that one would be, let me see, where is it? Controlled experiment. There it is. I was looking for it on my screen. Okay, so that one is observe, divide into, and use a control, which is, in other words, you don't do anything to that group. Don't change. And the other group, I guess, take charge of other group. Okay. Alright, so usually a simple, a really good explanation of a controlled experiment is if you're testing a new medicine, you would divide the group into two groups. You would randomly pick which group is going to be in which, and what's going to happen is that when you do that, you're going to give one group a placebo, which is like a sugar pill, and you're going to give the other group the actual drug and see if there's an actual effect done with them. Okay, so that you can get some actual stuff in there, so you can see if it's done and it's worked. Now, an observational study would be, you know, out in nature. You're just observing the habits of birds and just noticing what's going on with them. Okay, making an observation. Okay. All right, now a survey is pretty cool because you ask every member of a sample a set of questions. Okay, so this one's asking a set of questions. Okay. Now, I've had AP statistics students in the past do their final project as a survey. And the really, oh man, they drive me nuts because they did what was a convenient sample to them. And it select any member of the population who are conveniently and readily available. And they said, does performing in athletics actually help with your GPA? And right off the bat, I was like, I mean, I just did a face palm because it was like, are you serious? You play sports and you're only asking friends that are in the sport. So that's a huge convenient sample bias right there. It's a huge bias that you just want to avoid. You want to ask everyone and just use it that way. But you know, some people just continued to wanted to do that, and they left it as their thing, and they didn't score as much because they did a convenience bias. Okay, now a proper way to actually do that is to get a list of all the kids in the school, assign a number to each student, and then randomly pick numbers out so that you could actually ask those students, like, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Can we do this? Can we do that? Or you can do a controlled experiment where you take the students who play sports and the students who don't play sports, and you just observe what's going on with them, okay? And just see what's happening and see if the GPA does interfere. Okay, so it's some interesting stuff that a lot of people forget to do. Okay, but samples and surveys, if you just take your time and try to remove as much bias as possible from your actual questions, okay, like for example, do you think farmers should use poison to control insects on crops? There's automatically a bias that poison is saying, oh, you're that person that uses poison, and when in fact you're just trying to ask, you know, are you using pesticides? Do you think they should use pesticides? Don't you agree? Like, here's another one. Don't you agree that most child care workers are underpaid? You're already you're forcing the person you're asking the question to agree with you that they're underpaid, and that's creating a bias right there in the actual question. Okay. All right. When you're designing a survey of your own, keep it simple and keep it to a simple question, because sometimes that is the best question to ask that has the least amount of bias. So please take your time, think about what your question is going to be, and ask it that way, okay? All right, that's it for samples and surveys. I'll talk to you later.